The road to Lakewood Falls curved through dense pine forest, each bend revealing less of the world Morgan Chen was leaving behind. His Subaru's headlights cut through early winter darkness, illuminating occasional flurries that had begun falling an hour into his drive north from Boston. According to the GPS, he was still 20 minutes from his destination. 20 minutes from Blackwood Manor, from his new life as a state caretaker, from what his therapist had called a necessary reset. 3 months after the incident, Morgan still woke drenched in sweat, still heard phantom splashing when he closed his eyes. The job offer had arrived unexpectedly, an email referencing his security background, offering generous compensation for minimal responsibilities. Maintain the grounds, monitor the systems, ensure privacy. The attached non-disclosure agreement had been extensive, but Morgan had signed without hesitation. Anything to escape Boston's waterfront, the sympathetic glances, the administrative leave that felt increasingly permanent. The forest gave way suddenly to open land, frozen fields stretching toward a vast lake that reflected moonlight like polished obsidian. And there, silhouetted against the water, stood Blackwood Manor. Even from a distance, the house commanded attention. 3 stories of weathered stone and dark wood. Victorian grandeur with hints of something older in its foundation. Lights glowed in scattered windows, warm yellow against the blue-black night. Morgan turned onto a private drive marked by ornate iron gates that stood open, waiting. As he approached, the manor's details emerged, intricate woodwork along the eaves, stained glass accents catching moonlight. A widow's walk crowning the east wing. Beautiful, imposing, and undeniably isolated. He parked before massive double doors and sat for a moment, engine idling, heat blasting against the chill. According to his contract, he would occupy the caretaker's apartment in the West Wing, while the owner, Eleanor Blackwood, used the main residence during her intermittent visits. The rest of the sprawling manor would be his responsibility. Maintenance, security, preservation. A perfect job for someone seeking solitude. A perfect hiding place. Morgan killed the engine and stepped into winter air that smelled of pine, ice, and something mineral. The lake, he assumed. His breath clouded before him as he retrieved his duffel from the trunk. Service pistol tucked securely inside, despite being technically unnecessary for this position. Some habits died harder than others. Before he could knock, the right-hand door swung inward. A tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair stood in the entryway, her posture so perfectly erect it seemed almost unnatural. Despite her apparent age, somewhere in her 60s, Morgan guessed, she radiated vitality. Mr. Chen. Her voice carried the crispness of old money, each syllable precisely formed. Right on schedule. I'm Eleanor Blackwood. Morgan extended his hand. Thank you for this opportunity, Miss Blackwood. Her grip was cool and firm, lingering a moment longer than customary. Eleanor, please. We'll be sharing this space, after all. She led him into an entrance hall that soared 3 stories upward. A massive chandelier casting prismatic light across marble floors and wood-paneled walls. Morgan noted security cameras discreetly positioned in the corners. High-end models with exceptional range. Your references were impeccable, Eleanor said as they crossed the hall. Military service, executive protection, advanced security certifications. Frankly, you're overqualified. Morgan kept his expression neutral. I'm looking for something quieter. Less pressure. After the incident with the Asherton girl. Not a question. Tragic situation. The papers were quite merciless. His spine stiffened. The NDA had mentioned background checks, but the incident had been sealed in official records. I'd prefer not to discuss that. Of course. Eleanor smiled thinly. Privacy is something we value highly at Blackwood Manor. Now let me show you to your apartment. They ascended a grand staircase to the second floor, then a narrower service stairwell to the third. The west wing proved to be a self-contained living space. Bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen, and a comfortably furnished sitting room with windows overlooking the lake. This will be your primary residence, Eleanor explained, indicating a heavy iron key hanging by the entrance. The manor systems are monitored from here. She gestured toward a desk supporting 3 computer monitors, each displaying different security feeds and environmental controls. The basics are straightforward. Maintain temperature and humidity levels according to this manual. She handed him a leather-bound book that seemed unnecessarily elaborate for HVAC instructions. Monitor security feeds. No visitors without prior approval. The east wing remains locked at all times. It contains valuable collections requiring specialized environmental controls. Morgan nodded, mentally cataloging responsibilities. And grounds maintenance. Primarily ensuring the paths remain clear and security systems functional. We have service contracts for major landscaping. Eleanor moved to the window, gazing toward the lake. The water boundary is particularly important. No one approaches from the lakeside under any circumstances. Something in her tone caught Morgan's attention. Is trespassing a significant concern? Occasionally, her reflection in the dark glass smiled faintly. Lakewood Falls has peculiar local legends. The manor attracts curiosity seekers during tourist season. Morgan joined her at the window. From this height, the lake stretched like an abyss. Its far shore barely visible as a darker line against the night sky. It's not what you expected, Eleanor observed. I didn't have specific expectations. Everyone does, Mr. Chen. We construct narratives instinctively. She turned from the window, blue eyes assessing him with uncomfortable intensity. You expected a crumbling mansion, perhaps? A reclusive employer? Mysteries in locked rooms? Morgan maintained professional detachment. I expected a security position with living accommodations. That appears accurate. Eleanor laughed, the sound oddly musical in the quiet room. Refreshingly literal. You'll do well here. She moved toward the door. I'm leaving tomorrow for Morocco. Business interests abroad require attention. I'll return for the winter solstice, approximately 3 weeks from now. You'll be gone until then. The manor will be entirely yours. She paused at the threshold. One additional responsibility I should mention. The basement contains a dehumidification system that requires weekly inspection. The maintenance book details the procedure. Something about her phrasing struck Morgan as peculiar, but he nodded acknowledgement. The town is small, but adequate for basic needs, Eleanor continued. Sheriff Winslow knows you've arrived. Security professionals should establish relationships. Don't you agree? Martha at the general store can order anything specialized you might require. With that, she departed, leaving Morgan alone in his new apartment, the maintenance book heavy in his hands. He unpacked methodically, security training asserting itself as he assessed sightlines, exit routes, defensive positions. The apartment was well designed, easily secured, and with excellent visibility of approaching visitors. Later, as Morgan stood brushing his teeth, he noticed something unusual about his reflection. The bathroom mirror seemed to ripple slightly, as if the glass were liquid rather than solid. He touched its surface, cool, smooth, normal. Just tired eyes playing tricks after a long drive. That night, he dreamed of water. Dark water rising slowly around Blackwood Manor, seeping through stone walls, flowing beneath doors, filling the grand entrance hall inch by inch. In the dream, Morgan stood on the stairs, watching Eleanor Blackwood float serenely in the rising flood. Her blue eyes open, her silver-streaked hair swirling around her like tentacles. She smiled up at him, extending one pale hand toward the surface. "Join me," she said, voice perfectly clear despite the water. "It's your turn to become the caretaker." Morgan woke gasping, sheets twisted around him, the mineral smell of the lake somehow stronger inside his closed apartment. Dawnlight filtered through the windows, revealing ordinary surroundings. No water, no flooding. Just the quiet of an old house, settling. His first morning at Blackwood Manor had begun. 3 weeks in, Morgan woke to the silence only heavy snowfall creates. Overnight, winter had swallowed Blackwood Manor whole. Drifts piled against windows, trees transformed into crystalline sculptures. The temperature display on his phone showed -7 degrees Fahrenheit. The signal bars conspicuously absent. Complete isolation. He'd established rigid routines to manage the emerging PTSD symptoms that had driven him from Boston. 6 a.m. medication, 6:15 exercise, 7 a.m. inspect basement, dawn, as instructed, 7:30 breakfast. Each day meticulous, controlled, each task documented in his personal logbook alongside Eleanor's official one. After checking the furnace, Morgan bundled up for the exterior inspection. Opening the front door, he froze. Fresh footprints marred the otherwise pristine snowfall. Barefoot human prints leading from the direction of the lake directly to the porch. No returning tracks. "That's not possible," Morgan whispered, his breath clouding. The prints ended abruptly at the bottom step, as if their owner had simply vanished. No signs of disturbance in the surrounding snow. The temperature would cause severe frostbite to bare feet within minutes. Following protocol, Morgan photographed the prints with his phone, then traced them backward. They led straight to the lake, now frozen solid, a vast white plain merging with the snow-covered shore. The tracks emerged directly from the ice.
Something dark moved beneath the frozen surface. Morgan dropped to his knees, wiping away snow. For a split second, he glimpsed what looked like a human face pressed against the underside of the ice, eyes open, mouth forming words. He recoiled, scrambling backward. When he looked again, nothing was there. That afternoon, dwindling supplies forced a trip into town. The Subaru barely navigated the unplowed driveway, but the main road had been cleared enough to reach Lakewood Falls, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single intersection. The general store's bell announced his entry. Conversations abruptly ceased. 6 locals turned to stare, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something like pity. "You must be the new Blackwood caretaker," said the clerk, an older woman with tight gray curls. Her name tag read Martha. "Morgan Chen, just need to stock up." He handed her Eleanor's authorized account card. Martha examined it longer than necessary. "Blackwood Manor, huh? How you finding it up there?" Before Morgan could answer, the door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a tall man in a sheriff's uniform. The locals visibly relaxed. "Martha, got any of those molasses cookies left?" The sheriff stopped when he spotted Morgan. "Well, now, you must be Eleanor's new hire." "Sheriff Thaddeus Winslow," he continued, extending a weathered hand. "Everyone calls me Thad." His handshake was firm, his eyes calculating beneath the folksy demeanor. "First big snow treating you all right up there? Road to the manor can get tricky." "I'm managing," Morgan replied, "though I found some strange footprints this morning, barefoot, leading from the lake." The store went silent. Winslow's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "Probably just animals," he said too quickly. "Snow plays tricks, melts and refreezes, makes odd shapes." These were clearly human footprints. Winslow glanced at the other customers. "Folks around here sometimes ice fish on that lake. Probably someone trespassing. I'll look into it." As Martha rang up his groceries, a disheveled man approached. White-haired despite middle-aged features, one brown eye, one green, dressed in rumpled tweed. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "but did I hear you mention footprints by the lake?" Sheriff Winslow stepped between them. "Dr. Harmon, don't you have somewhere to be? Museum cataloging or whatever it is you do?" "Actually, I'm exactly where I need to be." Harmon deftly slipped a business card into Morgan's grocery bag. "Wesley Harmon, local historian. If you have questions about Blackwood Manor, I might have answers." "That's enough, Wes," Winslow warned. Harmon retreated, but not before whispering, "Check the portrait dates." The drive back was tense, Morgan replaying the strange interaction. Why had everyone reacted so strongly to mention of footprints? What portrait dates? The manor loomed darker against the white landscape as Morgan pulled up. Unloading groceries, he noticed something odd. His boot prints from that morning had vanished, filled with fresh snow despite the clear sky. Inside, he immediately sensed something different. The air felt disturbed, as if someone had moved through it recently. Nothing obvious was out of place, but subtle wrongness permeated everything. A chair angled differently, curtains arranged just so. Morgan drew his illegally kept service pistol from its hiding place and methodically cleared each room of the main floor. In the library, he found the first concrete evidence: wet patches on the hardwood floor, barefoot prints like those outside, leading to the locked basement door. Following protocol, he marked the spot with salt from the kitchen, then checked his own apartment. Everything appeared untouched until he reached the bedroom. The photographs on his nightstand, the only personal items he'd displayed, had been rearranged. The group shot of his security team now showed only empty background where people had stood. His parents' faces in their anniversary photo were blurred beyond recognition. Most disturbing, the picture of his estranged sister, Vanessa, had been altered. Her image remained clear, but now showed her underwater, eyes wide with terror, bubbles escaping her mouth. Morgan's hand trembled as he picked it up. The photograph was bone dry but ice cold. That night, he couldn't sleep. Wind howled around the eaves, carrying what sounded like distant voices calling his name. At exactly 3:33 a.m., all power in the house failed. Pitch darkness enveloped everything as the temperature began to drop. Protocol required checking the basement generator. Morgan delayed as long as possible, watching his breath materialize in the increasingly frigid air. Armed with a flashlight and his pistol, he finally ventured downstairs. The basement door key turned smoothly, despite the lock looking ancient. The hinges, oddly, made no sound. The temperature dropped further as he descended wooden stairs. His flashlight beam caught strange reflections. The floor at the bottom was covered in a thin sheet of water. The generator stood silent in the corner. No obvious malfunction, just complete shutdown. As Morgan examined it, he heard a faint splash behind him. He spun, gun raised. The flashlight illuminated nothing but stone walls and puddles. Then the beam caught a reflection in the water. Not his own face, but that of an old man with Blackwood's piercing blue eyes smiling up at him. The basement lights suddenly blazed on. The generator hummed to life without Morgan touching it. The water on the floor had vanished completely, leaving dry concrete. Upstairs, Morgan found all the clocks reset to midnight again. Sleep eluded him till dawn. At 7:14 a.m., his phone rang. Impossible given the lack of signal. The screen showed unknown. "Hello?" Morgan answered cautiously. "Morgan? Thank God!" His sister Vanessa's voice crackled through static. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Mom and Dad, they're gone. There was a fire, and I think someone's following me. I found your job contract. What the hell are you doing at a place called Blackwood Manor?" The call cut off abruptly. Morgan stared at the phone, ice spreading through his veins. His parents were fine when he'd taken this job, weren't they? He tried calling back, no service. When he looked at the altered photograph again, Vanessa's face had changed. Now she appeared to be screaming. Morgan's fingers trembled as he examined Dr. Harmon's business card. Wesley Harmon, Ph.D., Historical Research and Preservation, specializing in New England colonial history. Scrawled on the back in hasty blue ink, "Call from town, not from house." The manipulated photograph of Vanessa sat beside his phone, her face now frozen in a silent scream, surrounded by bubbles as if drowning. His parents' anniversary photo had deteriorated further, their images now completely blacked out, as if burned away. He needed answers. The drive to town felt longer than before, the forest pressing closer to the road. Morgan's eyes constantly darted to the rearview mirror, haunted by the sensation of being followed. Twice he pulled over to examine tracks in the snow behind him. Nothing there. Lakewood Falls's single payphone stood outside the post office, partially sheltered from the elements. Morgan fed quarters into the slot with numbing fingers and dialed the number on Harmon's card. "Historical Society, Harmon speaking." The voice sounded cautious. "Doctor?" "Harmon, it's Morgan Chen from Blackwood Manor. We need to talk." A pause. Meet me at the library basement in 20 minutes. Rear entrance. Don't tell anyone why you're in town. The library occupied a stone building that had clearly once been a church. Morgan entered through the back as instructed, descending narrow stairs to a basement archive room. Dr. Harmon waited, surrounded by stacks of papers and open books. "You found something," Harmon said immediately. Not a question. Morgan described the footprints, the altered photographs, the impossible phone call from Vanessa. With each detail, Harmon nodded, occasionally jotting notes in a leather-bound journal. "What did you mean about portrait dates?" Morgan asked. Harmon's mismatched eyes gleamed. "The Blackwood family portraits. Did you notice their dates?" "Some were labeled, but I didn't pay much attention." Eleanor Blackwood appears in portraits dating back to 1940, unchanged. Morgan frowned. "That's impossible. She'd be over 100. "Precisely." Harmon slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopied newspaper clippings spanning decades. Blackwood caretakers. 23 have been hired since 1910. None completed their contracts. The clippings told a grim story. Caretakers who vanished without trace, who suffered accidents, who fled in the night, leaving belongings behind. Most disappearances occurred near the winter solstice. "What happened to them?" Morgan asked. "I believe they were sacrifices." Harmon rolled up his sleeve, revealing a jagged scar around his wrist. "My daughter Lily was caretaker in 2017. When she stopped answering calls, I investigated. Got as far as the property line before something prevented me from entering. Found this carved into my arm afterward." The scar formed the same symbol Morgan had seen throughout the manor. "I've been researching the Blackwoods ever since," Harmon continued. "The original Jeremiah Blackwood wasn't a shipping magnate. He was running from something in Salem. The land he chose had significance to local tribes who avoided it. Their legends spoke of a hunger beneath the water." Harmon pulled out a journal with yellowed pages. This belonged to Reverend William Cooper, 1798. He writes about a blasphemous pact made by Blackwood with that which dwells in the depths. The Blackwoods sacrifice others to extend their own lives. "That's insane," Morgan whispered. "Is it? You've seen Eleanor. How many 78-year-olds look like that?" Harmon leaned forward. "Check your contract terms."
When exactly does your employment end? Morgan recalled the date. December 21st. Winter solstice, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. The basement door crashed open. Sheriff Winslow stood framed in the doorway, expression thunderous. "God damn it, Wes. We've talked about this." Winslow's hand rested meaningfully on his holstered weapon. "People deserve to know, Thad." Harmon shot back. "Know what?" Winslow's voice dropped dangerously. "That you've been obsessed with fairy tales since your daughter ran off with that boyfriend you didn't approve of? That you've been harassing Blackwood employees for years?" Morgan stood. "My sister called me. She said our parents are dead." Something flickered in Winslow's eyes. Recognition, then pity. "Mr. Chen, I checked after we met. There was a house fire in Boston 3 weeks ago. James and Linda Chen. I'm sorry." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Morgan. "That's impossible. I spoke to them before taking this job." When exactly was that? Winslow asked gently. Morgan couldn't remember. The timeline in his head suddenly felt fluid, unreliable. You need to leave town, Mr. Chen, Winslow said firmly. Break your contract. Walk away. He can't, Harmon interjected. Once you're chosen by the Blackwoods, the binding is supernatural. Haven't you noticed you can't leave the property for long? That you feel compelled to return? Morgan had noticed a growing anxiety the further he drove from the manor, an inexplicable relief upon returning. Enough, Wes. Winslow gripped Harmon's arm. Mr. Chen. Go home, to Boston, not Blackwood. Don't stop, don't pack. Just go. And abandon my sister if she comes looking for me? Morgan challenged. Winslow's expression hardened. Better one loss than two. As Morgan left, Harmon called after him. Find the hidden door in the basement. The ritual chamber. Outside, snow had begun falling again. Thick, ash-like flakes that seemed to whisper as they descended. Morgan sat in his car, mind reeling. He tried calling Vanessa's number repeatedly. No answer. The drive back to Blackwood Manor felt like moving through molasses. The forest seemed to close in, branches reaching for the car. Twice, Morgan nearly drove off the increasingly obscured road. The manor emerged from the snowfall like a predator from mist. As Morgan approached, he noticed something wrong. All the windows blazed with light, though he'd left only the porch lamp on. Inside, warmth greeted him, fires burning in every fireplace. The scent of roasting meat wafted from the kitchen. Morgan drew his pistol, moving silently through the house. In the formal dining room, he found a table set for 3, candles lit, steam rising from covered serving dishes. A note in elegant script sat on one plate. Welcome home, Morgan. We've been waiting. The house creaked around him. No longer the random settling of an old structure, but purposeful movement, as if the building itself were shifting to watch him. In the kitchen, the basement door stood open. Protocol demanded checking the basement at dusk. The sun was setting, blood red through snow-heavy clouds. Morgan descended slowly, gun ready. The basement appeared normal. Generator humming, storage boxes stacked neatly, concrete floor dry. He completed the inspection quickly, eager to return upstairs. As he turned to leave, a flash of movement caught his eye. A section of stone wall rippling like water. He approached cautiously, reaching out. His fingers passed through what appeared to be solid stone, encountering only cold, gelatinous resistance. Pulling back, Morgan watched his hand emerge, dripping with clear fluid, that immediately evaporated. The wall solidified again, but not before he glimpsed a corridor beyond. Stone steps descending deeper, walls lined with flickering blue light. Morgan backed away, heart hammering. Upstairs, he heard footsteps crossing the foyer. Too light for an intruder, too deliberate for imagination. "Hello?" he called, climbing the stairs. The house answered with silence, but all the carefully set places at the dining table had been disturbed. Chairs pushed back, napkins crumpled, food half-eaten. Water pooled beneath each chair, as if the diners had emerged, dripping from the lake. That night, Morgan barricaded himself in his apartment, pushing furniture against the door. He tried calling Harmon, using his cell phone, despite the lack of service, desperate enough to try anything. Miraculously, the call connected. "They're in the house," Morgan whispered. "Who?" Harmon's voice sounded distant, underwater. "I don't know, but they were eating at the dining table, and I found a hidden passage in the basement, just like you said." "Listen carefully," Harmon said urgently. "The ritual chamber will contain the binding symbols. If you can disrupt them..." The line went dead. Morgan's phone screen displayed an image of Vanessa, underwater, reaching toward the surface, then went black. Something scratched at his apartment door, gentle at first, then increasingly insistent. Not claws or fingernails, but something hard and sharp, like bone against wood. "Morgan." A voice called from the hallway, his mother's voice, exactly as he remembered. "Morgan, let us in. We've come to take you home." Another voice joined hers, his father's distinctive tenor. "Son, don't be afraid. We found a beautiful place. The water is so peaceful." Morgan pressed his hands against his ears, tears streaming down his face. "You're not real," he whispered. "But we are, little brother." Vanessa's voice now, so close it seemed to come from inside the room. "We're waiting for you in the deep. Eleanor promised we could be together forever." The scratching stopped. Silence fell, broken only by a sound like water dripping steadily onto the floor outside his door. Morgan didn't sleep. At dawn, he found courage to open the door. The hallway stood empty, but a trail of wet footprints led away toward the main staircase, 3 distinct sets corresponding to his family members. In the east wing, a door previously locked now stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, Morgan discovered Eleanor's private study, walls lined with monitors showing every room in the house, including his apartment. A ledger on the desk contained detailed notes on his daily routine, psychological observations, even transcripts of phone calls he'd made before coming to Blackwood. Most disturbing was a file labeled Chen Family, containing newspaper clippings about his parents' deaths and surveillance photos of Vanessa outside her apartment building, dated just 3 days earlier. Morgan was still processing this when his phone rang. Again, despite no service. "Morgan," Vanessa's voice, frightened but unmistakably real. "Where are you?" "I'm scared. Someone broke into my apartment. They had pictures of you in some place called Blackwood Manor. What's happening?" "Vanessa, listen carefully," Morgan said, voice steady despite his terror. "Where are you now?" "At a motel off I-95. I found papers with your new address. I'm coming to find you." "No, stay away from here. It's not safe." "Too late," she replied, voice suddenly calm. "I'm closer than you think. Eleanor said you'd try to warn me away. She said you've always been selfish." The line went dead. When Morgan tried calling back, the phone displayed a new image. Vanessa's car on a snow-covered road, approaching Blackwood Manor. The storm hit without warning, transforming from gentle snowfall to howling blizzard within minutes. Winds screamed around Blackwood Manor's eaves, rattling windows and throwing ice crystals like buckshot against the glass. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on the inside of window panes. Morgan paced his apartment, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. The image of Vanessa's car on the road to Blackwood remained frozen on the screen, taunting him. Every attempt to call back failed, his cell showing no service, yet somehow still able to display that one terrible image. "She can't be coming here," he muttered. "It's a trick. Has to be." The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. The sudden darkness was absolute, the storm clouds having already blotted out moon and stars. Even the emergency lights, which should have activated automatically, remained dark. Protocol required checking the basement generator during power failures. Morgan delayed, counting his heartbeats in the darkness, knowing what waited below, but unable to ignore his duties. The compulsion to follow Eleanor's procedures felt physical now. An invisible hook buried in his chest, pulling him toward the basement. The jade pendant beneath his shirt had grown inexplicably cold, the stone practically burning against his skin with its chill. Morgan grasped it, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. His flashlight cut a weak path through the darkness. The main staircase creaked beneath his feet, each step sounding like breaking bones in the silent house. The temperature continued to drop, his breath clouding before him, crystallizing on his stubbled chin. At the basement door, Morgan hesitated. Last time he'd been here, the wall had rippled like water, revealing glimpses of a hidden passage. His security training screamed against entering a confined space with unknown occupants and a single exit. But the pull in his chest tightened, compelling him forward. The key turned smoothly in the lock. As the door swung open, a blast of cold air rushed upward, carrying the mineral smell of lake water, and something underneath, copper and rot, like old blood and decaying vegetation. The beam of his flashlight trembled as he descended. The basement appeared normal at first. Concrete floor, stone walls, the hulking shape of the generator in the corner. But the air felt wrong, heavy with moisture, pressing against his eardrums like deep underwater pressure. The generator had simply stopped. No mechanical failure, no tripped breaker, just complete shutdown. Morgan checked the fuel gauge. Full tank. He tried the manual start. Nothing. Behind him, water dripped steadily onto concrete. Plip, plip, plip asterisk. Morgan turned slowly. The stone wall where he'd seen the rippling passage was now visibly leaking, clear fluid seeping between the stones and pooling on the floor. As his flashlight illuminated it, the liquid seemed to recoil, flowing away from the light as if conscious. The wall shimmered, its solidity becoming questionable. With each heartbeat, it seemed more like a membrane than stone, pulsing subtly in rhythm with Morgan's own racing pulse. His training told him to retreat, to secure the upper floors and wait for help. But help wasn't coming, and the hook in his chest pulled mercilessly, drawing him toward the wall. "Fuck it," Morgan whispered, and pressed his palm flat against the stone. His hands sank through as if the wall were made of gelatin. Cold engulfed his arm up to the elbow, a sensation like thousands of tiny mouths nibbling at his flesh. Morgan gasped, tried to pull back, but something on the other side gripped his wrist. With a sound like suction breaking, the wall seemed to swallow him. He fell forward into darkness, landing hard on stone steps slick with moisture. The flashlight clattered away, its beam illuminating a narrow descending staircase carved directly into bedrock. Morgan scrambled to retrieve the light, heart hammering. Behind him, the passage had sealed again, showing only solid stone where he'd fallen through. No way back. The stairs descended in a tight spiral, each step worn smooth in the center from centuries of use. The walls glistened with moisture, marked at regular intervals with the now familiar symbols he'd seen throughout the house. At the bottom, the passage opened into a circular chamber 30 feet across. Morgan's flashlight couldn't penetrate the darkness fully, but revealed enough to stop his breath. The room was a perfect match for the illustration he'd glimpsed in Eleanor's maintenance book, labeled simply, "The Holding Place." The floor was carved with concentric circles of symbols, creating a spiral pattern that converged in the center. Where a stone altar rose from the bedrock, the altar's surface was deeply stained, dark patches that could only be blood having soaked into the porous stone over countless rituals. Surrounding the altar, standing in a perfect circle, were glass cases. Display cases, Morgan realized with growing horror. Each contained personal effects, clothing, jewelry, photographs, arranged like museum exhibits. Labels beneath each case bore names and dates. Thomas Mercer, 1923. Maria Kowalski, 1945. Darius Williams, 1967. 23 cases in all. 23 caretakers. The most recent bore no name, only a date. December 21st, 2024. The upcoming winter solstice. Inside lay objects Morgan recognized with a sick jolt. His father's pocket watch, his mother's reading glasses, a bracelet he'd given Vanessa for her 30th birthday. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "I never brought these here." The final case stood empty, glass door ajar, awaiting its contents. The label read simply, Asterisk, Morgan Chen. Asterisk. Water began seeping from between the stones of the floor, rising impossibly against gravity to pool in the carved channels of the symbols. The liquid moved with purpose, flowing toward the altar at the center of the room. Morgan backed toward the stairs, but froze at a sound from above. Footsteps, multiple sets, descending slowly. Voices drifted down, a harmonized whisper that raised goosebumps on his arms. The water rises, the bargain holds, the faithful serve. The hunger grows. Asterisk trapped between the approaching voices and the increasingly flooded chamber. Morgan made a desperate decision. He circled the room, examining the display cases for anything useful. In the case labeled Wesley Harmon II, 1997, he found a journal bound in waterproofed leather. Flipping it open, Morgan discovered pages of frantic handwriting, diagrams of the symbols, translations. Harmon hadn't just researched the Blackwoods. He'd been a caretaker himself, presumably related to the Dr. Harmon Morgan had met in town. The journal contained a hand-drawn map of the chamber, with notes indicating a second exit, a tunnel that allegedly led to the lake. According to Harmon's notes, the original Blackwood had built it as an escape route before the entity claimed him. The footsteps grew closer. Morgan tucked the journal into his jacket and searched frantically for the hidden exit. There, a section of wall where the stones formed a pattern like rippling water, just like the passage in the main basement. As he pressed his hand against it, the wall yielded. Beyond lay darkness and the unmistakable smell of the lake. Morgan hesitated, flashlight revealing a narrow tunnel stretching into blackness. The sound of rushing water echoed from its depths. Behind him, the chamber began to fill more rapidly, water now ankle-deep and rising. The voices on the stairwell grew louder, no longer just whispers, but a rhythmic chant in a language Morgan didn't recognize. He had no choice. Taking a deep breath, Morgan plunged into the tunnel, the wall sealing behind him with a wet, sucking sound. The tunnel sloped upward then down, twisting like a snake through bedrock. In places it narrowed so severely that Morgan had to turn sideways to squeeze through, the rough stone scraping his back and chest. The air grew colder, damper, the mineral smell of the lake overwhelming. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel widened into a small cave. Morgan's flashlight revealed rippling patterns overhead. He was underneath the lake, the cave ceiling a thin membrane of ice through which filtered weak moonlight. The journal had mentioned this place, the threshold where the original pact had been sealed. According to Harmon's frantic notes, this was where Jeremiah Blackwood had first made contact with the entity, offering his first sacrifice in exchange for prosperity and extended life. Morgan's flashlight beam caught something floating in the center of the cave. A body, suspended in a bubble of water that defied gravity and physics. The corpse wore clothing from another century, preserved perfectly in the airless liquid environment. Captain Blackwood himself, Morgan realized. Not a beneficiary of the pact, as Eleanor had implied, but its first victim. The captain's eyes snapped open. Morgan stumbled backward, a scream frozen in his throat. The corpse's mouth moved, forming words that emerged as bubbles in the water. She lied to you. We all become water in the end. Asterisk, the cave began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the ice ceiling, water seeping through in quickening streams. The suspended corpse reached toward Morgan, arms elongating impossibly, fingers stretching like tendrils. Morgan turned to flee back through the tunnel, but found it sealed with ice. Trapped, he cast about desperately for another exit. There, a narrow fissure in the rock wall, barely wide enough for a person. As water poured increasingly from above, Morgan squeezed into the fissure. It climbed steeply, a natural chimney through the rock. He scrambled upward, fingernails breaking on stone, lungs burning with effort. The fissure narrowed, then widened suddenly. Morgan pulled himself up and out, collapsing onto a snow-covered bank. He lay gasping, staring up at swirling snowflakes illuminated by moonlight, breaking intermittently through storm clouds. He'd emerged at the edge of the frozen lake, perhaps 50 yards from the shore nearest Blackwood Manor. The house loomed like a crouching beast, windows dark except for the third-floor east wing, where lights blazed from rooms he'd been forbidden to enter. Morgan struggled to his feet, body shivering violently from cold and shock. His clothes had frozen stiff in the bitter air. He needed to reach the house before hypothermia set in, yet every instinct screamed against returning. Halfway to the shore, the ice beneath his feet shuddered. A spiderweb of cracks spread outward from where he stood. Morgan broke into a desperate run, ice fracturing with each step. Behind him, the frozen lake erupted. A column of water shot skyward, suspended impossibly in the air for several seconds, before collapsing back into a perfectly circular hole in the ice. From this new opening rose a figure, humanoid but wrong, proportions distorted, skin glistening wetly in the moonlight. Morgan didn't look back again. He reached the shore and sprinted toward the house, no longer caring what waited inside, knowing only that it offered shelter from what pursued him across the snow. The back door yielded to his key. Morgan stumbled into the kitchen, slamming and locking the door behind him. Through frosted windows, he watched the figure from the lake pause at the property's edge, swaying slightly before melting back into the snow as if it had never existed. Shivering uncontrollably, Morgan stripped off his frozen outer layers. The power remained out, the house growing colder by the minute. He needed warmth, needed to think. In the formal dining room, the fireplace suddenly roared to life, without Morgan touching it. Drawn by the heat, he approached cautiously, extending numb hands towards the flames. The fire cast dancing shadows across the room. In their movement, Morgan glimpsed faces. The previous caretakers, he realized, their expressions frozen in terror. Something thumped heavily overhead. 3rd floor, east wing. Then again, slower, deliberate. Footsteps crossing from one end of the forbidden wing to the other. Morgan retreated to his apartment, barricading the door again. He spent hours poring over Harmon's journal by candlelight, deciphering the frantic handwriting. The journal detailed the history of the pact, the nature of the entity, and most importantly, its limitations. The entity could not enter the house unbidden. It required invitation or a conduit, a person who had been claimed through ritual but not yet sacrificed. Each solstice sacrifice renewed the bargain, granting another generation of Blackwoods extended life and prosperity. If the ritual failed, however, the entity would claim a Blackwood instead. This had happened only once, according to the journal, in 1843, when a caretaker escaped, forcing Eleanor's great-grandfather to offer himself. The entity existed in a state between worlds, anchored to this reality through the binding symbols carved throughout the house. These symbols both contained it and created a bridge, allowing it limited access to the physical world. Most crucially, the journal mentioned a protective charm, jade, properly blessed. Morgan touched the pendant beneath his shirt, his father's gift, understanding now why the entity hadn't simply claimed him in the cave. Dawn broke, pale light filtering through frozen windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline landscape transformed by ice. Morgan watched the sun rise, mind racing with possibilities. His phone rang, the sound startling in the silence. The screen showed Vanessa's number. "Morgan, thank God." Her voice sounded real, frightened. "I'm almost there. My car slid off the road about a mile from where your GPS location shows. I'm walking the rest of the way." "Vanessa, no!" "Stay away." Morgan's voice broke with desperation. "I can see the house, Morgan. It's beautiful. Someone's coming down the driveway to meet me. An older woman." The line went dead. Morgan rushed to the window. In the distance, 2 figures approached through the snow. Vanessa, bundled against the cold, and beside her, Eleanor Blackwood, returned months ahead of schedule. Between them and the house, the snow-covered ground rippled like water disturbed by something moving just beneath the surface. Morgan's breath fogged the frozen window as he watched Eleanor guide Vanessa toward the house. His sister looked small beside Eleanor's tall figure. her purple-streaked hair visible even at this distance. She walked with the slight limp she'd had since childhood. Confirmation this was truly Vanessa, not some water-formed doppelganger. He had minutes, perhaps seconds, to act. The gun was useless. Harmon's journal had been explicit about conventional weapons having no effect on either Eleanor or the entity. But the jade pendant offered protection, and the journal contained other possible defenses. Morgan tore through his apartment, gathering supplies: salt from the kitchen, candles, matches, Harmon's journal, the maintenance book with its strange protocols. Last, he retrieved his service pistol, useless against supernatural threats, but potentially necessary for human ones. As he worked, a realization struck him like physical pain. He'd been so focused on the mysterious entity beneath the lake that he'd overlooked the most immediate threat: Eleanor Blackwood herself. If Harmon's research was correct, she'd orchestrated dozens of sacrifices over a supernaturally extended lifetime. She was no helpless old woman in thrall to ancient forces, but their willing servant and beneficiary. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Morgan pressed himself against his apartment wall, listening intently. "What a lovely home." Vanessa's voice drifted up the stairs. Morgan never mentioned working in such a grand place. "Your brother values his privacy," Eleanor replied, her aristocratic tone carrying easily. "He'll be so surprised to see you. I still don't understand why you came all the way back from Morocco just to bring me here. Family should be together, especially after tragedy." Eleanor's voice dripped with rehearsed sympathy. "When I learned about your parents, I knew Morgan would need support." Their footsteps crossed the foyer, moving toward the grand staircase. Morgan had seconds to decide: confront them directly or hide and observe. Security training prevailed: gather intelligence before engagement. He slipped from his apartment, moving silently to the hidden alcove near the third-floor landing, where a servant's staircase offered an unobserved vantage point of the main hall. Eleanor and Vanessa ascended slowly, his sister leaning heavily on the ornate banister. She looked exhausted, face drawn with grief and strain. "Morgan," Vanessa called. "Are you here? It's me." "He's likely in the East Wing," Eleanor said smoothly, working on cataloging the collection. "He's been quite fascinated with family history." Morgan's blood ran cold. Eleanor was steering Vanessa toward the Forbidden Wing, the one place in the house he'd never been permitted to enter. They reached the second floor, Eleanor producing a key from her pocket. Not the iron key she'd given Morgan, but something older, crafted from what looked like bone. "This wing houses our most precious artifacts," Eleanor explained as they approached the locked double doors. "Morgan has been helping prepare them for the winter solstice ceremony, a small family tradition." The double doors swung open silently, despite their apparent age and weight. Beyond lay a corridor Morgan had never seen, walls lined with glass display cases, similar to those in the underground chamber, but more elaborately presented. Even from his hiding place, he could make out preserved objects spanning centuries: clothing, jewelry, weapons, all arranged by era. "What kind of ceremony?" Vanessa asked, voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. "Renewal," Eleanor replied. "The Blackwoods believe in honoring the past while embracing the future. the solstice marks the transition point. They move deeper into the wing, voices fading. Morgan crept from his hiding place, following at a safe distance. The east wing felt different from the rest of the house. The air heavier, charged with static electricity that raised the hair on his arms. The mineral lake smell was stronger here, underlying everything. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that must have occupied most of the wing, a combination library, laboratory, and ritual space. Bookcases stretched to the ceiling, filled with ancient tomes. Glass-fronted cabinets displayed bottles of liquid in various colors. At the center stood an exact replica of the stone altar from the underground chamber. Eleanor guided Vanessa to a sitting area near a massive fireplace where tea had been set out as if servants had prepared it moments before. Impossible, given that Morgan had seen no one enter the house. "Please, make yourself comfortable while I find your brother," Eleanor said, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. "Actually, I need to use the restroom first," Vanessa replied. "Travel always disagrees with me." "Of course, down the hall to your left." The moment Vanessa left, Eleanor's posture changed completely. The gracious hostess vanished, replaced by predatory alertness. She moved to one of the cabinets, removing a vial of clear liquid that she emptied into Vanessa's teacup. "You can come out now, Mr. Chen," she said without turning. "I know you're there." Morgan stepped into the room, gun trained on Eleanor's back. "Get away from that tea." Eleanor turned slowly, unperturbed by the weapon. How melodramatic, and entirely unnecessary. "What did you put in her cup?" "A mild sedative. Nothing harmful, yet." Eleanor's blue eyes assessed him coldly. "You've been busy during my absence. The basement. The ritual chamber. Dr. Harmon's helpful insights. You killed his daughter, and all the others." Eleanor sighed, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her immaculate suit. "Such limited perspective. I preserved them. They continue to serve a greater purpose." "As what?" "Food for that thing in the lake." "Not food, components." She gestured around the room. "Everything here. The house, the land, the water. It's all connected to what you call the entity. I prefer its proper name, the confluence. I don't care what you call it. You're not sacrificing my sister." Eleanor's laugh was genuine, sparkling with actual amusement. "Your sister? Oh, Morgan, you still don't understand. Vanessa isn't the sacrifice." Her eyes locked with his. "You are." Morgan felt ice spread through his veins. "Then why bring her here?" "Insurance. The confluence requires willing sacrifice for maximum efficacy. Throughout history, we've discovered that people rarely volunteer themselves, but will quite readily exchange their lives for loved ones." She tilted her head, studying him. "The contract you signed was quite explicit, though hidden in legal terminology. You've already consented." A flash of memory, signing paperwork without reading it fully, desperate for escape from Boston after the incident. Had he signed away his life without realizing? "The ritual requires physical presence, but mental absence," Eleanor continued, her tone academic, detached. "Hence the tea. In previous centuries, we used opiates. Now, pharmaceutical solutions are more reliable." Movement in the doorway. Vanessa had returned, her face pale with shock as she registered both Morgan's presence and his drawn weapon. "Morgan? What's happening?" Her eyes darted between them. "She's been planning to kill me, Vanessa. She brought you here to force my cooperation." "That's absurd," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "Your brother has been under tremendous strain, Vanessa. First the incident in Boston, then your parents. I feared his mental state was deteriorating, but I had no idea he'd become delusional." "I'm not delusional," Morgan snapped. "She's not even human, Ness. She's keeping herself alive by feeding people to something that lives under the lake." Vanessa edged into the room, keeping distance between herself and both of them. "Morgan, you're scaring me. Put the gun down." "Listen to your sister," Eleanor said. "We can discuss this rationally." "There's nothing rational about sacrificial rituals," Morgan replied. "Vanessa, we need to leave. Now." "No one is leaving." Eleanor's voice hardened. "The preparations are already underway. The confluence is awake and hungry after a long dormancy." As if responding to her words, the house groaned around them. Not the random settling of an old structure, but coordinated movement, like muscles contracting. The fireplace flared higher, without added fuel. Water began seeping from between floorboards. Vanessa's eyes widened. "What's happening?" "We need to go," Morgan insisted, reaching for his sister. "It's too late," Eleanor said calmly. "The solstice alignment has begun. The barriers between worlds thin. The confluence rises." The room temperature plummeted suddenly. Frost formed on windows, spreading in patterns that matched the symbols throughout the house. The seeping water on the floor began flowing with purpose, forming rivulets that spelled out words in a language Morgan didn't recognize. He grabbed Vanessa's arm, pulling her toward the door. "We're leaving." Eleanor made no move to stop them, her smile knowing. "By all means, try. The house is sealed until the ritual completes or fails. It has been this way since 1796. Morgan dragged Vanessa into the hallway, rushing toward the main staircase. Behind them, Eleanor's voice called out a phrase in the same unknown language written in water on the floor. The house responded immediately. Doors slamming shut, windows sealing with ice so thick they became opaque. "Morgan, you're hurting me," Vanessa gasped, pulling against his grip. He released her arm but kept moving. "We can't stay here. That woman thing, whatever she is, she's using us." "For what?" "This makes no sense." They reached the main staircase, only to find it transformed. Steps now rippling like liquid, despite maintaining their physical form. Descending would mean wading through whatever the steps had become. "This way." Morgan redirected them toward the servants' stairs he'd used earlier. These remained solid, though the walls around them wept moisture that collected into small pools on each landing. They descended rapidly, Morgan leading, Vanessa following close behind. At the ground floor, they rushed toward the front entrance. The massive door stood firmly closed. Morgan wrestled with the handle, finding it immovable despite not being visibly locked. "The kitchen door," he suggested, pulling Vanessa along. Every exit they tried remained sealed by invisible forces. Windows resisted breaking, the few Morgan managed to crack immediately, sealing with crawling ice that spread like living tissue. "We're trapped," Vanessa whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Morgan, What is this place? A prison, he answered grimly. But there's one place we might be safe. He led her to his apartment, relieved to find it unlocked and apparently untouched. Inside, he quickly gathered the supplies he'd assembled earlier, stuffing them into a backpack. "Morgan, talk to me," Vanessa pleaded. "What's happening?" First Mom and Dad, now this nightmare. Mom and Dad, Morgan interrupted. Were they really killed in a fire? Pain flashed across Vanessa's face. 3 weeks ago, their house burned to the ground. Police said it started in Dad's study, but everything was too damaged to determine the cause. 3 weeks, Morgan echoed. The same time I arrived here. I've been trying to find you ever since. Your old security firm wouldn't give me any information. Then someone slipped your employment contract under my door with this address. "Eleanor," Morgan muttered. "She's been manipulating all of this." But why? Because of what's in the basement. Morgan finished packing and slung the backpack over his shoulder. "We need to go somewhere safer first. Then I'll explain everything." They moved cautiously through the house, Morgan leading them toward the library. According to Harmon's journal, the room contained a hidden priest hole, a concealed chamber dating from when the original structure had served as a waypoint on the Underground Railroad. If the journal was correct, the room had been constructed with protective symbols that might shield them temporarily. The library stood empty, fireplace cold, the only sound water dripping steadily from the ceiling into growing puddles on the floor. Morgan ran his hands along the oak paneling beside the fireplace, searching for the mechanism Harmon had described. "Here," he whispered as his fingers found a small depression. Pressing it caused a section of paneling to swing inward, revealing a space perhaps 6 feet square, enough for 2 people to hide in cramped conditions. "Get in," Morgan urged. Vanessa hesitated. "What is this?" "Hiding place. The only room Eleanor might not control completely." Once inside, Morgan pulled the panel closed. Darkness enveloped them until he lit one of the candles he'd brought. The small flame revealed symbols carved into every surface of the tiny room. The same patterns found throughout the house, but arranged differently, forming barriers rather than conduits. "Now will you tell me what's happening?" Vanessa asked, huddling against the wall. Morgan opened Harmon's journal, showing her the diagrams and notes. This place isn't just a house. It's a vessel, a container for something ancient that lives in the lake. The Blackwood family made a deal with it centuries ago. They feed it sacrifices. It grants them extended life and power. "That's insane," Vanessa whispered. "I've seen it, Ness. Under the lake, in the walls. It's real." Morgan flipped to a page, showing sketches of previous caretakers. Every solstice, they sacrifice someone. This year, it's supposed to be me. Vanessa studied the journal with growing horror. "And Eleanor brought me here to ensure your cooperation." "Exactly." "What is this thing? This confluence?" Morgan shook his head. Harmon wasn't sure. His theories range from ancient deity to interdimensional being. Whatever it is, it exists primarily as water, but can manifest in different forms. A sound from outside their hiding place. Footsteps crossing the library floor. Unhurried, deliberate. "They're in the priest's hole, aren't they?" Eleanor's voice, directly outside the panel. How predictable. Dr. Harmon sought refuge there too, before we found him. Morgan pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Vanessa to remain silent. The symbols protect you temporarily, Eleanor continued conversationally, but they weaken with exposure to the confluence. Even now, water seeps through the wood, dissolving the barriers. She was right. Moisture had begun collecting along the seams of the paneling, droplets forming and running downward in tiny rivulets. "I'm not without sympathy, Morgan," Eleanor said. "This burden has fallen to my family for generations. We didn't create the confluence. We merely found a way to control it. Without the rituals, without the sacrifices, it would consume indiscriminately." Morgan remained silent, mind racing. The journal mentioned a potential weakness. The binding symbols throughout the house created a network, a web of control. If enough symbols were destroyed simultaneously, the network might collapse. "You have until midnight," Eleanor's voice came again. "Emerge willingly for the ritual, and I'll ensure Vanessa returns safely to her life, with no memory of this place. Refuse, and the confluence will claim you both, along with everyone in Lakewood Falls. It hungers after such a long dormancy." Her footsteps retreated, leaving silence broken only by the steady drip of water infiltrating their hiding place. "She's lying," Vanessa whispered once Eleanor had gone. "She won't let me leave." "I know," Morgan agreed, "but we might have a chance if we can break the binding symbols." He showed Vanessa the relevant pages in Harmon's journal, diagrams indicating the primary nodes of the symbol network. The altar in the east wing, the ritual chamber below the house, the well in the north garden, and the original cornerstone embedded in the entrance hall floor. "If we disrupt these simultaneously," Morgan explained, "it might break the connection between the house and the entity." "Might?" Vanessa questioned. "It's the only theory Harmon had that he didn't get to test." Morgan checked his watch. 4:17 p.m. We have less than 8 hours before midnight. The hiding place had grown uncomfortably damp, water now dripping steadily from the ceiling. The protective symbols carved into the wood were visibly eroding, their edges softening as if being digested. "We can't stay here much longer," Morgan said. "We need to get to my apartment and prepare." They pushed open the panel, finding the library transformed. Furniture rearranged into a rough circle, books scattered on the floor, open to pages displaying similar symbols. The puddles had expanded and connected, forming a continuous sheet of water across the floor, rippling occasionally as if disturbed from below. Morgan led Vanessa carefully around the water's edge, keeping to the few remaining dry patches of floor. The house had grown unnaturally quiet, the usual creaks and settling sounds replaced by pregnant silence. They made it to the apartment without encountering Eleanor. Once inside, Morgan barricaded the door and emptied his backpack on the bed. "First, protection," he said, handing Vanessa his jade pendant. "This has kept me safe so far. You need it more than I do." "What about you?" Morgan showed her a page from the journal. "Salt forms a temporary barrier, and I found this in Harmon's belongings." He held up a small iron medallion inscribed with symbols. "It's not as powerful as jade, but it might help." They spent the next hour preparing. drawing protective symbols at entry points using salt, studying the journal for any additional defenses, and planning their approach to the 4 key nodes. "We'll need to split up," Morgan concluded reluctantly. "It's the only way to hit all 4 points simultaneously." "I'll take the well and the cornerstone," Vanessa volunteered. "They seem more accessible." Morgan nodded. "I'll handle the altar in the east wing and the underground chamber. Both likely have additional protections." He checked his watch again. 5:46 p.m. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the winter day giving way to what promised to be the longest night of the year. As if responding to the darkness, the house came alive around them. Floorboards flexed and contracted like breathing lungs. Water began seeping under the door despite the salt barrier, which dissolved upon contact. From somewhere deep in the house came a sound like massive bellows inflating. The house itself inhaling. "We need to go. Now." Morgan gathered their supplies, handing Vanessa a hammer and chisel for defacing the symbols. "Remember, midnight exactly, not a second before or after." Vanessa clutched the jade pendant around her neck, her expression hardening with determination. "I'll be ready." They embraced briefly, the first physical contact they'd had in years. Morgan felt the old familial connection surge through him, the protective instinct that had driven him to security work, the same instinct that had fractured their relationship when he'd forcibly removed her from their parents' anniversary party. "Be careful," he whispered. "You too," she replied. "Don't you dare die on me when we've just found each other again." With that, they separated, Vanessa heading downstairs toward the entrance hall cornerstone, Morgan moving toward the east wing to confront whatever waited at the altar there. The house seemed to watch their progress, doors opening or closing to direct their movements. Morgan realized with growing dread that Eleanor wasn't controlling their path. The house itself was, guiding them precisely where it wanted them to go. The east wing embraced Morgan like a lover, doors swinging open at his approach, lights flickering to life as he passed. No resistance, no barriers, only invitation. The house wanted him here, guiding him deeper into its secrets. The corridors had transformed since his earlier visit with Vanessa. Display cases now lined every wall, glass fog-free despite the moisture saturating the air. Each contained mementos from previous caretakers, watches, glasses, jewelry, all preserved as if new. Names and dates marked each display, stretching back centuries. Morgan's steps slowed as he approached the final case. Empty, waiting, with his name etched on a small brass plaque. Beside it stood another unmarked case. Vanessa's, he realized with a surge of nausea. "We've been preparing for you for some time." Eleanor's voice drifted from the end of the corridor. She stood framed in the doorway to the ritual chamber, silhouetted against blue-white light emanating from within. Her posture was different, straighter, taller, radiating vitality that seemed impossible for her chronological age. "The preparations were quite specific," she continued, gesturing for him to approach. "A broken warrior, bearing both physical and psychological scars. Someone with protective instincts, but a history of failure. Someone with a severed family connection that could be exploited." Morgan's hand tightened around the iron medallion in his pocket. "You engineered all of this." "Not engineered, recognized." Eleanor's smile was thin. The confluence has needs, preferences. It shows us potential vessels through the water. You appeared to us months ago. Your reflection in Boston Harbor after that unfortunate incident with your client. The memory flashed unbidden. Morgan diving into harbor waters after the teenage daughter of a tech billionaire. The girl sinking beneath the surface despite his efforts. Her body recovered hours later. You've been watching me since then. Evaluating, Eleanor corrected. The confluence requires certain qualities in its vessels. You possess them in abundance: courage, desperation, guilt. She stepped aside, inviting him into the chamber. Please, we have preparations to complete before midnight. Morgan entered cautiously. The chamber had transformed completely since his earlier glimpse. The stone altar now dominated the center, surrounded by concentric circles of standing candles that burned with unnatural blue flames. The walls rippled constantly, stone giving way to membrane-like surfaces that pulsed with internal movement. Beautiful, isn't it? Eleanor gestured around them, the thinning of barriers between worlds. Soon the confluence will manifest fully, accepting your essence while leaving your physical form intact. Meaning what exactly? Your consciousness will join the confluence, becoming part of its collective awareness. Your body will remain, hosting a fragment of the confluence's consciousness, similar to how I host Jeremiah's awareness alongside my own. Morgan's blood ran cold. You're not Eleanor. I am Eleanor, she replied. And I am Jeremiah, and Thomas before him, and all Blackwoods who came before. We continue, preserved within the confluence, our bodies maintained by its power. The altar began to weep clear fluid that pooled in carved channels matching the symbols throughout the house. The liquid moved with purpose, forming patterns that shifted and reformed continuously. What happens to the sacrifices? Morgan asked, playing for time. His watch showed 7:23 p.m., hours yet before midnight. They join us, though differently. Without proper preparation, they cannot maintain individual awareness. They become... Eleanor paused, searching for words, background voices in the chorus. Energy rather than consciousness. And Vanessa. What happens to her? Eleanor's expression softened, with what appeared to be genuine regret. Collateral necessity. The ritual requires emotional catalyst. Sacrifice made meaningful through loss. Her presence ensures your cooperation. But once the transfer begins, the confluence will require balance. She dies too. She joins, Eleanor corrected. All water returns to water, eventually. Morgan needed to keep her talking, to learn anything that might help disrupt the ritual. The symbols throughout the house, they control the confluence? Not control. Define, contain, guide. Eleanor traced a finger through the liquid on the altar, which followed her movement, like a trained pet. Without boundaries, the confluence would expand endlessly, consuming everything it touches. The symbols create channels, like riverbanks directing flow. And if those channels were broken? Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Concern, quickly masked. Impossible. The binding network has stood for centuries, reinforced with each sacrifice. Even the attempt would be unwise. She knew, Morgan realized. She'd anticipated their plan to disrupt the symbols, which meant Vanessa was walking into a trap. Now, Eleanor said, we begin the preparation. Please remove your shirt and lie upon the altar. It's not midnight yet. The physical preparation takes hours. The transfer itself occurs at the moment of solstice alignment. Eleanor gestured impatiently. The confluence is already rising. Delay invites discomfort. As if emphasizing her point, the floor beneath them trembled. From somewhere below came a sound like rushing water, growing louder by the second. What was that? Morgan asked, though he already suspected. The basement chamber has flooded, Eleanor replied calmly. The tunnel to the lake has opened fully. The confluence rises to claim what is offered. Vanessa. She would be heading toward the basement now, unaware of the danger. Morgan's mind raced. He needed to warn her, but couldn't reveal their plan. The watch showed 7:31. He had to stall further. I need to understand what I'm agreeing to, he said. Show me what happens during the transfer. Show me the confluence. Eleanor studied him, head tilted slightly. Curiosity, another quality the confluence values. She moved to a cabinet against the wall, removing a crystal decanter filled with clear liquid. This will help you perceive what normally remains hidden. She poured the liquid into a silver chalice inscribed with familiar symbols. Drink, and you will glimpse what waits beyond the veil. Morgan accepted the chalice cautiously. The liquid within appeared to be water, but moved wrongly, too viscous, too purposeful. He pretended to sip while actually letting it run down the side of his face. All of it, Eleanor instructed sharply. No choice. Morgan drank deeply, the liquid burning like alcohol, but tasting of minerals and something older, metallic and organic, simultaneously. It hit his system immediately, the room tilting around him as his pupils dilated fully. The walls dissolved completely, revealing the true nature of Blackwood Manor. Not wood and stone, but something organic. A massive circulatory system pumping water instead of blood. The house was alive, had always been alive, an extension of the entity below. Beyond the dissolved walls, Morgan perceived the lake. Not a natural body of water, but a thin membrane covering something vast beneath. The confluence existed primarily in another dimension, only partially manifested in this reality through the water. Most disturbing were the faces, hundreds of them, suspended within the walls and floors. Previous sacrifices, their consciousness preserved but diffused, expressions frozen in eternal horror. Among them, Morgan recognized Dr. Harmon, eyes wide with recognition as Morgan perceived him. You see now, Eleanor's voice seemed to come from everywhere. The confluence preserves. Nothing is truly lost, only transformed. Morgan's watch read 7:49, though it felt like hours had passed. The drug was potent, but clearing rapidly from his system, another unexpected benefit of his jade pendant's protection. What about the town? He asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Lakewood Falls. Are they part of this too? To a lesser extent, Eleanor replied. They provide sustainability between solstices, small contributions. A missing child here, a drowned fisherman there. Sheriff Winslow ensures minimal investigation. The entire town knows. Not consciously, but they sense it. Every settlement near water develops legends, taboos. Lakewood Falls simply has more reason than most. Eleanor checked an ornate clock on the wall. Nearly time for the final preparations. Morgan needed to act. Vanessa would be approaching the basement chamber, unaware it had flooded. He had to reach her, warn her, but couldn't reveal their plan to Eleanor. "I need to use the bathroom first," he said, the feeble excuse sounding hollow, even to his ears. Eleanor's laugh was surprisingly genuine. How human. "Very well, down the hall. But hurry, the confluence grows impatient." The moment he left the chamber, Morgan broke into a sprint. Not toward the bathroom, but the main staircase, taking steps 3 at a time. He needed to reach Vanessa before she entered the basement. The house fought him now, corridors stretching impossibly, doors slamming shut in his path. The floor beneath his feet became unstable, boards flexing and buckling like the surface of the lake during a storm. Morgan pressed on, following the mental map he'd constructed during weeks of residence. Second floor, main staircase, entrance hall, where Vanessa should be working on the cornerstone. He burst into the entrance hall to find it transformed. The floor had become a shallow pool, water covering the ornate tiles completely. In the center, where the cornerstone should be, stood a perfect circle of dry floor surrounding Vanessa as she knelt, hammer and chisel in hand. "Vanessa!" Morgan called. She looked up, startled. "Morgan, what are you doing here? It's not midnight yet." "Trap," he gasped, wading through ankle-deep water toward her. "The basement's flooded. Eleanor knows our plan." The water around him began to churn, forming whirlpool eddies that pulled at his legs. The level rose rapidly, now reaching his knees. "Get out!" he shouted. "Get to higher ground!" Vanessa stood, but remained rooted in her dry circle. "I can't move," she said, panic rising in her voice. "My feet, they're stuck to the floor." The water continued rising, now at Morgan's waist. Something brushed against his leg underwater. Not fish or debris, but fingers, grasping, pulling. "The pendant," Morgan called. "Use the jade." Vanessa clutched the pendant, which began to glow with soft green light. The dry circle around her expanded slightly, pushing back the encroaching water. Morgan fought toward her, each step requiring immense effort against the current and the hands that grabbed at him from below. The iron medallion in his pocket grew hot against his thigh, offering minimal protection. "What do we do?" Vanessa cried as he finally reached her, stepping into the dry circle which accommodated them both. "Change of plan," Morgan said, retrieving Harmon's journal from his waterproof pack. "We need to hit all 4 points at once, but we can't separate. The pendant protects both of us if we stay together." He flipped to a page showing an alternative ritual. One Harmon had theorized could transfer the binding from one person to another, not breaking the connection to the confluence, but redirecting it. "We can't break the symbols," Morgan explained rapidly, "but we might be able to change who they bind to. If we can transfer the connection from Eleanor to one of us, we might control the confluence long enough to escape." "Transfer it to whom?" Vanessa asked, already suspecting the answer. "Me." Morgan met her eyes steadily. "The pendant will protect you during the transfer, and afterward, you can use it to leave. The confluence wants me anyway. This just changes the terms." "Absolutely not," Vanessa said fiercely. "We find another way." "There is no other way," Morgan insisted. Look around us. The water had risen to chest height, outside their protective circle, now filling the entrance hall completely. Through it swam forms that were almost human, but wrong. Elongated limbs, two wide mouths, eyes that reflected light like deep-sea creatures. We have maybe an hour before midnight, Morgan continued. If Eleanor completes her ritual, we both become part of the confluence forever. This way, at least you survive. Vanessa's expression hardened with the same stubborn determination she'd shown since childhood. What do we need to do? Morgan explained quickly. They would need to reach all 4 symbol nodes, applying the blood of a Blackwood to each, while reciting the transfer incantation. The journal theorized that Eleanor's frequent transfusions to extend her life had introduced enough Blackwood lineage into other bloodlines that any blood exposed to the confluence might work. Where do we get Blackwood blood? Vanessa asked. Morgan grimaced. From me. According to the journal, I've been drinking water from the lake for weeks. The confluence has been preparing me, changing me. My blood should carry enough of the signature now. That's insane, Vanessa whispered. This whole situation is insane, Morgan replied with a grim smile. But it's our only chance. He checked his watch. 8:37 p.m. We start with the cornerstone here, then move upward. East wing altar, well in the garden, and finally the basement chamber. Using his pocket knife, Morgan sliced his palm, letting blood drip onto the cornerstone at Vanessa's feet. The stone absorbed the liquid eagerly, symbols carved into its surface, beginning to glow with the same blue-white light as the candles in the ritual chamber. Together, they recited the incantation from Harmon's journal, words in a language neither recognized, but which felt familiar on their tongues, as if the knowledge had always been there, waiting. The cornerstone pulsed once, twice, then flared brightly. The water surrounding their dry circle receded slightly, creating a narrow pathway toward the staircase. It's working, Vanessa said, hope coloring her voice for the first time. For now, Morgan cautioned. We need to move quickly. They followed the dry path, water walls rising on either side, like the parting of a biblical sea. The house shuddered around them, aware something had changed in the ritual pattern. From above came Eleanor's voice, echoing impossibly throughout the house. What have you done? The water walls trembled, drops falling like rain as her control reasserted itself. The path began to close behind them as they raced up the staircase. Faster, Morgan urged as they reached the second floor. The east wing doors stood open, ritual chamber blazing with light beyond. They sprinted down the corridor, past the display cases, which now rattled violently, glass cracking as their contents, the preserved mementos of previous sacrifices, began to disintegrate. In the ritual chamber, the altar waited, liquid now boiling on its surface. Morgan sliced his palm again, deeper this time, letting blood flow freely onto the stone. The mingling of blood and ritual water created an immediate reaction. Steam rising in patterns that formed faces, expressions contorted in pain or ecstasy. Again, they recited the incantation, voices joining in eerie harmony. The altar responded more powerfully than the cornerstone, the entire room flaring with light so intense they had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the chamber had transformed. The walls no longer rippled, but had solidified into normal stone. The candles burned with regular orange flames rather than supernatural blue. 2 down, Morgan said, checking his watch. 9:14 p.m. We're making good progress. As they turned to leave, Eleanor blocked the doorway. She had aged decades in minutes, skin now deeply wrinkled, hair fully white, blue eyes clouded with cataracts. Only her posture remained unchanged, spine straight with inhuman rigidity. "You cannot break the covenant," she said, voice cracking with age. "The confluence has sustained us for generations. Without it, we are nothing." "We're not breaking it," Morgan replied. "We're changing the terms." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's milky eyes. The transfer ritual, Harmon's theory. She laughed, a dry sound like dead leaves scraping stone. "Foolish boy, the transfer requires Blackwood blood, pure lineage." "We'll see," Morgan said, stepping forward. "Move aside, Eleanor." "The confluence won't accept a diluted vessel," she continued, not budging. "It will consume you both, along with everyone in Lakewood Falls." "Maybe," Morgan acknowledged, "but right now, it's consuming you instead." Eleanor's appearance confirmed it. The confluence was withdrawing its preservation, reclaiming the decades of extended life it had granted her. She was reverting to her true age, perhaps beyond it, as the entity demanded payment for broken terms. "You don't understand what you're doing," Eleanor said, voice now barely a whisper. "The hunger must be satisfied. If not through ritual, then through chaos." "We'll take our chances," Morgan replied. "Now move, or we'll move you." Eleanor's laugh turned into a cough, blood speckling her lips. "You still think this is about escaping? How charmingly human." She stepped aside with effort, joints creaking audibly. "Go. Complete your transfer. The confluence welcomes new management." Her cryptic statement troubled Morgan, but they had no time to decipher it. They hurried past her withering form, back through the corridors toward the main staircase. The house's transformation had accelerated. Wood grain flowing like liquid, walls breathing visibly, floors undulating beneath their feet. The pendant's protection extended around them in a perfect circle, creating a bubble of normality amid the chaos. "The garden well next," Morgan said as they descended. Then the basement chamber. Outside, winter air hit them like a physical blow after the humid interior. The garden had transformed completely. All snow melted, despite freezing temperatures, revealing lush growth that should have been impossible in December. Plants from different continents and climates thrived side by side. Orchids blooming beside Arctic lichen. Desert cacti intertwined with tropical vines. At the center stood the well, its wooden cover removed despite Eleanor's strict instructions to keep it sealed. From its depths rose steam, carrying the now familiar mineral smell of the lake. As they approached, the ground became spongy, waterlogged. Their protective circle left temporary dry footprints that filled with water seconds after they passed. The well itself was ancient, stone-lined, descending into darkness far deeper than seemed possible given the house's elevation. Morgan knelt at its edge, slicing his palm a third time. The wound from previous cuts had already healed, leaving no scar. Further evidence of the confluence's influence on his physiology. Blood dripped into the well, disappearing into darkness. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, from deep below, came a sound like massive bubbles rising to the surface. The incantation, Morgan reminded Vanessa. Together, they recited the words again. This time, Vanessa stumbled over certain phrases, as if something fought her participation. Morgan's voice grew stronger in contrast, the words feeling increasingly natural to his tongue. The well responded with a geyser of water that shot upward 30 feet before arcing gracefully back to the earth, not a drop falling on them despite their proximity. Where the water touched, plants withered instantly, replaced by new growth that matured in seconds, a compressed cycle of death and rebirth. Morgan checked his watch. 10:26 p.m. One more. The basement chamber. The house awaited their return, doors opening eagerly before them. The transformation had progressed further, walls now transparent in places, revealing the circulatory system Morgan had glimpsed under the influence of Eleanor's potion. The confluence flowed throughout the structure, more active now, responding to the transfer ritual's progress. The basement door stood open, darkness beyond. Unlike before, no water seeped from beneath it. The stairs appeared dry, solid. "I don't like this," Vanessa said, clutching the pendant more tightly. "It's too easy." Eleanor said the confluence welcomes new management. Morgan replied grimly. "I think it's accepted the transfer." They descended cautiously, Morgan leading. The basement appeared normal at first. Concrete floor, stone walls, generator humming quietly in the corner. No sign of the flooding Eleanor had mentioned. The hidden passage to the ritual chamber was now obvious. An arched doorway, where once had been solid stone, blue-white light spilling from beyond. "Ready?" Morgan asked, taking Vanessa's hand. She nodded, squeezing his fingers. Together. The ritual chamber had drained completely, floor dry for perhaps the first time in centuries. The altar at its center waited, symbols glowing softly in anticipation. Around the room, the glass cases containing previous caretakers' belongings had shattered, contents scattered across the floor. Only Morgan's empty case remained intact, door standing open invitingly. They approached the altar. Morgan prepared to cut his palm a final time, but found the previous wounds had vanished completely. His skin bore no evidence of the 3 deep cuts he'd made earlier. "Morgan," Vanessa said suddenly, voice tight with alarm. "Your reflection." He looked down at the altar's polished surface. The face that looked back was his, but changed. Eyes now showing hints of Blackwood blue, features subtly altered to resemble the portraits in the entrance hall. It's already happening, he realized. The transfer is nearly complete. His watch read 11:17 p.m. The ritual required completion at exactly midnight, when the solstice alignment reached its peak. They had time, but not much. Morgan cut his palm a final time, watching with detached fascination as blood welled black rather than red, moving with the same purposeful flow as the liquid on the altar. He let it drip onto the stone, where it spread in perfect concentric circles, following the carved channels without guidance. The incantation came without needing the journal now, the words flowing from Morgan's lips with perfect pronunciation. Vanessa's voice joined his, though she struggled more with each syllable, as if speaking through water. The altar flared with intensity that surpassed all previous reactions. The light expanded outward, encompassing the entire chamber, then the house above, visible through suddenly transparent ceilings. It reached the lake, illuminating depths that had never known sunlight, revealing the true form of the confluence. Not a singular entity, but a collective, a hive mind composed of thousands of absorbed consciousnesses spanning centuries. As the light faded, Morgan felt the change complete itself. Knowledge poured into his mind. The house's history, the true nature of the pact, the extent of the confluence's domain. Generations of Blackwood memories became accessible, including Eleanor's, revealing the family's careful cultivation of suitable vessels across centuries. Most disturbing was the realization that the transfer ritual had been anticipated, even encouraged. Harmon's journal hadn't been accidentally discovered. It had been planted, the protective ritual designed not to free them, but to create a more perfect vessel than Eleanor's aging form could provide. "Vanessa," Morgan said, his voice resonating strangely in the chamber. "We need to leave. Now." His sister stared at him, expression shifting from concern to fear. "Your eyes." Morgan knew without checking that his eyes now matched Eleanor's piercing blue, the mark of Blackwood succession, of confluence habitation. "I can control it," he assured her. Not entirely confident this was true, but we need to go before midnight, before the alignment completes. Vanessa backed away slightly. "What happens at midnight?" "Full integration," Morgan answered, knowledge flowing from memories not his own. The vessel accepts the confluence completely, becomes its primary anchor in this reality. "And you'll still be you." Morgan hesitated, partly alongside the others. Vanessa's expression hardened with determination. "Then we have 40 minutes to get as far from here as possible." They hurried from the chamber up the basement stairs. The house no longer impeded their movement, but seemed to encourage it, passages widening to accommodate them, lights brightening their path. In the entrance hall, they found Eleanor waiting. She had aged further, now appearing mummified, skin drawn tight over bones, only her eyes still vital and human again, the Blackwood blue replaced by their original brown. "Free," she whispered as they approached. "After 217 years, free." "You knew," Morgan accused. "You planned this transfer." Eleanor's desiccated lips formed a smile. "The vessel ages. The confluence requires youth, vitality. You were chosen long before you knew we existed." "I'm not staying," Morgan insisted. "We're leaving before midnight." "Oh, child." Eleanor's laugh was a death rattle. "The confluence is already within you. Has been since your first drink of lake water. The ritual merely formalizes what was already done." Morgan felt the truth of her words. The entity had been preparing him for weeks, changing him cell by cell. The ritual was ceremony, not substance. "What about the town?" he demanded. "Lakewood Falls. Were they part of your plan too?" "Sustenance," Eleanor replied simply. "The sacrifices maintain the Blackwood line, but the confluence requires more. The town provides supplements. And if I refuse to continue your traditions, then the confluence feeds indiscriminately." Eleanor's body was deteriorating visibly, flesh crumbling like ancient parchment. The hunger must be satisfied, vessel to vessel, generation to generation. The only choice is method, not necessity. Morgan checked his watch. 11:31 p.m. We're leaving. As you wish, Eleanor said, voice fading. But remember, water flows everywhere. There is no true escape from what you've become. They stepped around her crumbling form, pushing through the front doors, which opened without resistance. Outside, the night air was supernaturally still, stars blazing overhead in patterns that seemed to form the same symbols carved throughout the house. The Subaru's keys were in Morgan's pocket. The car started immediately, despite the cold. Drive, Vanessa urged as he hesitated, looking back at the house. Morgan, we need to go now. He put the car in reverse, backing down the driveway. Every cell in his body screamed in protest, the separation physically painful as distance grew between himself and Blackwood Manor. The jade pendant around Vanessa's neck glowed brightly, its protection extending to include him while they remained in contact. What's happening to you? Vanessa asked as they reached the main road, turning toward town. The transfer, Morgan replied through gritted teeth. It's fighting the separation. Can you make it? I have to. They drove in tense silence, Morgan fighting the compulsion to turn back with every mile. The road to town seemed longer than before, forest pressing close on both sides, branches reaching like grasping hands toward the vehicle. As they approached Lakewood Falls, Morgan's watch showed 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight. The town appeared deserted, streets empty, buildings dark except for the sheriff's office, where lights blazed from every window. We need to warn them, Morgan said, pulling over. There's no time, Vanessa protested. We can't just leave them to whatever happens at midnight. Morgan was already exiting the car, legs moving automatically toward the sheriff's office. Inside, they found not just Sheriff Winslow, but what appeared to be most of the town's adult population. Perhaps 50 people crowded into the small building, faces drawn with tension and fear. Winslow stepped forward as they entered. You broke the covenant, he said without preamble. You knew, Morgan accused. All of you. You've been feeding people to that thing for generations. Not feeding. An older woman corrected, Martha from the general store. Sacrificing. For the greater good. The Blackwood Pact protects us all, Winslow explained. One chosen vessel at the solstice, and the confluence remains contained, controlled. Without that structure, he trailed off, implication clear. The midnight alignment approaches, another townsperson said. We can feel it. The water is rising. Morgan realized they were right. A subtle vibration hummed through the floorboards, through the ground itself. Pipes rattled in the walls. In the corner, a water cooler bubbled ominously, liquid inside moving against gravity. You need to leave town, Morgan warned. All of you. Get as far from water as possible. Winslow shook his head. We can't. We're bound to this place, just as you're bound to Blackwood Manor. The confluence has touched us all to some degree. Then what do we do? Vanessa asked. You return, Martha said simply. Complete the transfer. Restore the balance. Morgan's watch showed 11:53 p.m. 7 minutes. And if I refuse? Dr. Harmon pushed through the crowd, his mismatched eyes wild. Then what happened to my daughter happens to everyone. Absorption without preservation. Consumption without purpose. Your daughter, Morgan remembered. Lily. She was a caretaker. She discovered the truth too late, Harmon said. Tried to escape. The confluence took her anyway, but without ritual structure, without preparation. Her consciousness was fragmented. Morgan felt the knowledge confirm itself. Fragments of Lily Harmon existed within the confluence, disjointed, in perpetual awareness of her dissolution. Can she be restored? He asked. New understanding flowing through him. Harmon's eyes widened. What? The confluence preserves all it absorbs. Under proper direction, structured consciousness might be retrievable. Morgan spoke with certainty that came from somewhere beyond himself. Blackwood knowledge, confluence awareness. You would do this? Harmon asked, voice breaking. Restore her? In exchange for the town's help in establishing new terms, Morgan replied. A more equitable arrangement with the confluence. His watch read 11:56 p.m. 4 minutes. The sheriff and townspeople exchanged glances, centuries of fear warring with desperate hope. What terms? Winslow asked cautiously. Voluntary contributions rather than sacrifices. Symbolic offerings rather than full absorption. Limits on the confluence's reach. Morgan could see the possibilities unfolding. A restructured covenant that might satisfy the entity's needs without the horror of the current arrangement. And my daughter, Harmon pressed. I'll try, Morgan promised, but I need to return now, before midnight. The townspeople parted, creating a path to the door. Vanessa gripped his arm. You're not going back there, she insisted. We're leaving together. Morgan turned to her, seeing his reflection in her eyes. His face, but with Blackwood blue irises, glowing faintly in the fluorescent light. I'm already part of it, Ness, he said gently. Have been since I arrived. The only question is whether I control it or it controls me. Then I'm coming with you. Morgan shook his head. Number. You keep the pendant. Stay in town with Dr. Harmon. If I fail, if the confluence rejects the new terms, you'll know. And you'll still have a chance to escape. His watch showed 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes. The decision made, Morgan moved with sudden urgency, kissing Vanessa's forehead before sprinting to the car. He drove recklessly back toward Blackwood Manor, the vehicle responding to his will more than his actual operation, as if the confluence itself powered the engine. The house appeared on the hill, every window blazing with blue-white light. The lake beyond had frozen again, ice surface glowing with the same luminescence, symbols visible within the translucent surface. Morgan abandoned the car at the foot of the driveway, running the remaining distance. His watch read 11:59:30 as he reached the front steps. Inside, the entrance hall had transformed into a replica of the ritual chamber, complete with central altar. Eleanor's remains had vanished completely, not even dust remaining to mark her passing. Morgan approached the altar as his watch ticked toward midnight. The house trembled around him, the moment of alignment approaching. He placed both hands on the stone, feeling the confluence respond to his touch. Eager, hungry, yet also cautious of this new arrangement. New terms, Morgan stated firmly. Voluntary contributions. Symbolic offerings. Limited domain. The confluence surged within him, testing his resolve. his worthiness to dictate terms. Morgan stood firm, drawing on security training, on the protective instinct that had defined his career, on the connection to Vanessa he'd nearly lost. "These are my conditions," he repeated. "Accept them, or I reject the vessel status entirely." His watch hit midnight precisely as the solstice alignment reached perfection. The house, the lake, the land itself seemed to hold its breath for one infinite moment. Then the confluence responded, not with words, but with understanding that flowered directly in Morgan's mind. Acceptance with conditions of its own. A negotiation rather than submission. Morgan felt himself expanding, consciousness stretching to encompass the house, the grounds, the lake. He perceived Vanessa in town, the jade pendant glowing around her neck. He sensed the townspeople, their ancestral connection to the confluence through generations of proximity. Most remarkably, he perceived the previously absorbed hundreds of consciousnesses in varying states of preservation. Eleanor, most recent and most intact. Jeremiah, oldest and most diffused. And there, Lily Harmon, fragmented but retrievable, as he'd suspected. As midnight passed and the alignment began to fade, Morgan felt the transfer complete itself. He remained himself, but more, access to Blackwood memories, to confluence awareness, to a power that could either preserve or destroy. The first test of his new role would come with the dawn, explaining to Vanessa and the town what he had become, what bargain he had struck on their behalf. Not freedom, not exactly, but a more humane containment of something that could never truly be destroyed. Morgan Chen, security specialist, traumatized veteran, estranged brother. Now the newest vessel of the confluence, the latest in the Blackwood legacy, guardian of an ancient power that hungered always for more. As the house settled around him, adjusting to its new master, Morgan looked toward the eastern horizon, where dawn would eventually break. For the first time in centuries, the confluence would greet the sun not with ravenous hunger, but with structured appetite. Whether this new arrangement would hold beyond the next solstice remained to be seen. But for now, balance had been restored, albeit in a form Eleanor could never have anticipated. The water was calm, the bargain held. The faithful would serve differently. The hunger remained, but controlled. And Morgan Chen, once only himself, now stood at the center of it all. No longer just the caretaker of Blackwood Manor, but its essence, its future, its hope for redemption. 6 months later, spring had fully claimed Lakewood Falls. The town bloomed with renewed vitality, gardens thriving, businesses prospering, a sense of cautious optimism replacing generations of quiet dread. Morgan sat on the dock extending into the lake, watching the water lap gently against the weathered wood. His reflection showed what he'd come to accept as his new normal. Eyes permanently shifted to Blackwood blue, features subtly altered to echo his predecessors. Not dramatic enough to attract attention from strangers, but unmistakable to those who knew him before. "Mind if I join you?" Vanessa asked, approaching with 2 mugs of coffee. Morgan smiled, patting the spot beside him. "Your dock as much as mine." She settled next to him, handing over one of the steaming mugs. The jade pendant still hung around her neck, glowing faintly in perpetual vigilance. They discovered it served as both protection and connection. allowing Vanessa to resist the confluence's influence while maintaining her bond with her brother. "Doctor, Harmon called," she said after a comfortable silence. "Lily's making good progress." Morgan nodded, genuinely pleased. The retrieval of Lily Harmon's consciousness had been his first significant act as vessel, not resurrection. Her physical form remained lost, but the restoration of her awareness into a new body, grown from confluence material. The process had been exhausting, drawing on knowledge from generations of Blackwoods, but the result vindicated his new approach. "She's remembering more?" he asked. "Still fragmentary, but improving. He says she recalled their trip to Yellowstone when she was 12. "That's significant," Morgan observed. "Personal memories rather than just basic functions." The process of retrieval had proven more complex than anticipated. While the confluence preserved everything it absorbed, extracting specific consciousnesses required precision. Lily had been the test case, partially successful, with a personality that was recognizable but incomplete, housed in a form that approximated but didn't perfectly match her original appearance. "The town council wants to meet next week," Vanessa continued, sipping her coffee. "Something about revising the annual contribution schedule." Morgan suppressed a sigh. 6 months into his role as mediator between town and confluence, the administrative aspects remained the most challenging. The new covenant required voluntary contributions, symbolic offerings of blood, personal mementos, and ritual observance, rather than complete sacrifices. But establishing acceptable parameters had involved weeks of negotiation. "I'll talk to them," he promised. "Remind them that quality matters more than quantity. The confluence responds better to willing participation than reluctant compliance." Vanessa studied him over the rim of her mug. "You're getting better at balancing them. The others." She meant the previous vessels, the Blackwood consciousnesses that now shared his mind. In the early weeks, Morgan had struggled to maintain dominance, occasionally slipping into speech patterns or mannerisms belonging to Eleanor or Jeremiah. Now he managed them more effectively, accessing their knowledge while preserving his own identity. "They're settling," he acknowledged, accepting the new arrangement. "And the hunger?" Vanessa asked quietly. Morgan gazed across the lake, considering his answer carefully. The confluence's fundamental nature remained unchanged. It consumed, it absorbed, it expanded. His role was not to eliminate that nature, but to channel it constructively. "Manageable," he replied finally. "The monthly ritual satisfies the immediate needs. The solstice ceremony will address the rest." The approaching summer solstice would mark his first full cycle as vessel. Unlike previous generations, Morgan had established a different approach to the alignment ritual. Instead of a single, unwilling sacrifice, the entire town would participate in a controlled ceremony, each offering a small essence of themselves while remaining fundamentally intact. "Sheriff Winslow still has doubts," Vanessa noted. "He thinks we're just delaying the inevitable, that the confluence will eventually demand more." "He's not wrong to be cautious," Morgan admitted. "This is uncharted territory. No previous vessel attempted to reform the covenant so fundamentally." The truth, which he shared only with Vanessa, was more nuanced. The confluence was ancient beyond human comprehension, its patience measured in geological time rather than human lifespans. It had accepted Morgan's terms not from moral conversion, but from pragmatic adaptation, a more sustainable approach to consumption that might yield greater results over centuries rather than decades. "I've been thinking about expanding our research," Morgan said, changing the subject. Dr. Harmon found references to similar manifestations in other locations, always near water, always with local legends of disappearances or transformations. "You think there are more like the confluence?" "Not exactly like it, but related phenomena. The Blackwoods weren't the first to encounter such entities, just the most successful at establishing a structured relationship." Morgan traced patterns in the lake's surface with his finger, the water responding to his touch by forming temporary symbols. "If we could locate other sites, compare manifestations and containment methods." Vanessa's expression grew concerned. "You're talking about leaving Lakewood Falls?" "Not permanently," Morgan assured her. "Brief expeditions only. The confluence's influence extends about 50 miles from the lake. I can operate within that radius, without strain." What he didn't mention was the increasingly frequent visions, glimpses of other bodies of water where similar entities existed in varying states of containment or freedom. The confluence seemed eager to establish contact with its counterparts, for reasons Morgan couldn't yet determine. "There's something else," Vanessa said, setting down her mug. "I found more of Harmon's research in the East Wing. Journals he kept hidden from Eleanor." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Hidden successfully. That's impressive." "He used the priest's hole. Apparently, the protective symbols disrupted the confluence's awareness, enough to maintain small secrets." She hesitated. "Morgan, he believed the confluence isn't native to our reality, that it came through a tear between dimensions created by the original Blackwood ritual in 1796. "A summoning gone wrong," Morgan mused. "That would explain the need for continuous containment rather than banishment." He theorized that with the right approach, the tear could be sealed. The confluence returned to its own dimension. Morgan felt immediate resistance to this idea, not from himself, but from the Blackwood consciousnesses within him. Generations of vessels had maintained the status quo, benefiting from the confluence's power while managing its appetite. The possibility of severance threatened everything they'd built. "That would mean the end of the Blackwood legacy," he said carefully. "No more extended lifespans, no more influence over natural forces." "But freedom from the hunger," Vanessa countered. "For you, for the town, for everyone connected to it." Morgan stared across the lake, considering possibilities that stretched beyond human lifespans. The confluence had granted the Blackwoods extraordinary longevity. Eleanor had lived nearly 2.5 centuries before transferring her vessel status. Under the new covenant, Morgan's potential lifespan remained unclear, but likely extended far beyond normal human limits. "It's worth investigating," he conceded finally, though implementing such a solution would require resources beyond what we currently possess. Vanessa seemed satisfied with this response, returning to her coffee. She didn't press further, understanding the complexity of Morgan's position, both himself and not himself. both jailer and prisoner to the entity that had claimed him. Movement on the far shore caught Morgan's attention. A solitary figure walking along the tree line. Through the confluence's expanded awareness, he recognized Martha from the general store, making her weekly pilgrimage to leave small offerings at the lake's edge. A personal ritual established after her son's drowning decades earlier, now incorporated into the new covenant. "I have a session with Lily this afternoon," Morgan said, rising from the dock. "Want to join me?" Vanessa nodded, following him back toward the house. Blackwood Manor had transformed under Morgan's influence. No longer a decaying monument to past glory, but a living structure that responded to its new master's vision. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by something still otherworldly, but less malevolent. The East Wing had been converted into a rehabilitation center for retrieved consciousnesses. Lily Harmon occupied the primary suite, her new form requiring specialized care as it adjusted to physical existence. 2 other retrievals had begun more recently, earlier sacrifices whose consciousnesses remained sufficiently intact for potential restoration. As they approached the house, Morgan felt the familiar pressure at the base of his skull, the confluence communicating directly rather than through words or visions. It registered satisfaction with the current arrangement, approval of the retrieval project, anticipation for the solstice ceremony. But underneath ran a current of something else, a restlessness, an ambition that extended beyond Lakewood Falls. Morgan had learned to interpret these impressions with increasing accuracy. The confluence wasn't merely content with its improved containment. It was planning something on a scale beyond anything the Blackwoods had attempted. "You okay?" Vanessa asked, noticing his momentary distraction. "Just listening," Morgan replied with a reassuring smile. Inside the manor, they found Dr. Harmon already working with Lily in the main parlor. Her new form had stabilized into something recognizably human, petite with dark hair, and Harmon's distinctive heterochromatic eyes, though certain movements remained unnaturally fluid, betraying her confluence origins. "Morgan." She greeted him, voice still carrying an echo quality. "I remembered something new." "That's excellent," he encouraged, taking a seat across from her. "What was it?" "The binding symbols." Lily gestured to the patterns, visible in the woodwork around them. "I understand their purpose now. Not just containment, but communication. They're a language, allowing the confluence to express itself in our reality." Morgan exchanged glances with Dr. Harmon, who nodded confirmation. "She started drawing them this morning. Perfect reproductions, with variations I've never seen documented." Lily handed Morgan a sketchbook filled with intricate symbol patterns. Unlike the established Blackwood designs, these incorporated new elements, circles within circles, interconnected in ways that suggested expansion rather than containment. "These are significant," Morgan acknowledged, feeling the Blackwood consciousnesses stir with recognition and unease. "Where did you see them?" "In the between place," Lily replied, "where we wait during absorption. The patterns are constantly forming, dissolving, reforming. I think..." She hesitated. "I think they're trying to build something." "Build what?" Vanessa asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't know. Something bigger than Blackwood Manor. something that connects all the water, everywhere. The implications sent a chill through Morgan, despite his connection to the confluence. If Lily was right, the entity's ambitions extended far beyond Lakewood Falls, perhaps to regional water systems, river networks, eventually oceans. We should discuss this later, Dr. Harmon interrupted, noting his daughter's increasing agitation. Lily needs rest after retrieval sessions. Morgan agreed, leaving the sketchbook with Harmon for further study. As they exited the parlor, Vanessa gripped his arm. "What does it mean?" she whispered. "Is the confluence trying to escape containment?" "Not escape," Morgan corrected, drawing on knowledge from Eleanor's memories. "Expand. It's always wanted to expand, from the very beginning. The Blackwoods just convinced it to do so gradually, controllably. And now it sees new possibilities through me." Morgan led her toward his study, formerly Eleanor's private office. "My security background, my understanding of modern infrastructure. It's learning through me, adapting its strategy." In the study, Morgan retrieved the maintenance book he'd discovered months earlier. What he'd initially taken for routine house procedures had revealed itself as something far more significant. A detailed record of the confluence's attempts to extend beyond the lake, using water systems as conduits. Eleanor was managing expansion on a very limited scale, he explained, showing Vanessa diagrams of Lakewood Falls' water infrastructure, allowing minimal extension into the town's supply, enough to maintain influence over residents without alerting outside attention. "And what does it want now?" Morgan hesitated, reluctant to voice the full extent of what he'd gleaned from the Blackwood memories and the confluence's communications. Integration rather than isolation. It believes there are others like itself, contained in similar arrangements across the continent, perhaps the world. It wants to establish contact. That sounds... Vanessa searched for the right word. Apocalyptic. It could be, Morgan acknowledged. Or it could be evolutionary. The confluence isn't inherently malevolent. It's alien, operating on principles fundamentally different from human ethics. The consumption, the absorption. That's how it perceives connection, communion. By eating people, by incorporating their essence. Under the old covenant, that meant sacrifice. Under the new terms, we're exploring more symbolic integration. Morgan closed the maintenance book, but the ultimate goal remains unchanged. Expansion, connection, transformation. Vanessa touched the jade pendant instinctively. And where do you stand in all this? Are you Morgan Chen, who controls the confluence, or are you becoming the confluence wearing Morgan Chen's face? The question cut to the heart of his daily struggle. Maintaining his humanity while navigating the growing influence of the entity within him. With each passing month, the distinction between his original self and his vessel status blurred further. Both, he answered honestly. I contain the confluence, and it contains me. We're negotiating a balance that preserves what matters most from both perspectives. And what matters most to you? Vanessa pressed. Protection, Morgan replied without hesitation. Same as always. In Boston, in the Army, as a security specialist, my core purpose hasn't changed, just the scale and methods. He didn't add that his definition of protection had expanded with his awareness, encompassing not just individuals, but communities, ecosystems, potentially the broader balance between dimensions. The Blackwood consciousnesses within him understood this evolution as natural progression, the inevitable expansion of perspective that came with vessel status. "I should check on Sheriff Winslow," Morgan said, changing the subject. He mentioned concerns about the reservoir project. The town's water supply was undergoing authorized expansion, officially to improve infrastructure, unofficially to accommodate the confluence's measured growth. Each new pipe, each reservoir connection represented carefully negotiated territory, balanced between human needs and otherworldly influence. Vanessa nodded, recognizing the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. 6 months into their new reality, she had developed an intuitive understanding of when Morgan needed space to commune with the entity within him. "I'll review Lily's symbols," she offered. "See if they match anything in Harmon's hidden journals." They parted ways, Vanessa toward the library, Morgan toward the entrance hall where his Subaru waited. The vehicle had been modified with special containers in the trunk, holding lake water that maintained his connection to the confluence during journeys beyond the immediate property. As he drove toward town, Morgan reflected on the approaching solstice. The ritual would mark a turning point, either confirmation that his new covenant could satisfy the confluence's needs, or revelation that more drastic measures would be required. In either case, the ripples of his decision to accept vessel status had only begun to spread. Throughout Lakewood Falls, throughout the connected waterways, throughout dimensions that intersected with ordinary reality at specific points of convergence. Morgan Chen, caretaker, negotiator, vessel, balancing between worlds that were never meant to touch, yet could never truly be separated again. The water connected everything, everyone. Always had, always would. And beneath the surface of that connection, ancient awareness watched and waited. Patient beyond human comprehension, hungry beyond human satiation, contained for now, cooperative for now. But the patterns Lily had drawn suggested something more ambitious forming in the depths, something that would eventually require Morgan to choose between his humanity and his covenant, between the world as it was and the world as the confluence envisioned it could be. The summer solstice would reveal which path he would take. Until then, the water remained calm, the hunger remained managed, and Morgan Chen remained himself. Mostly. For now, that would have to be enough.